Let's check in with the listeners.
Hey, listeners.
Listeners, remember you can always reach us at the email address gamescoop@ign.com, just like Randall did.
Okay.
Ooh. Randall Flagg.
Antoine Randall L.
Randall said,
For those of you not watching, Damon just got an evil smile on his face.
I just, I like the anticipation when you don't know whether it's going to be Big Tony style.
It was him 2 weeks in a row. So
I think he just changes his name some weeks.
Yeah.
Actually, I think, to be honest, I have not talked to Big Tony style about this, but I think
that's really polite. He's just been providing you conversation topics forever.
I mean, I'm
never responded.
I'm saying I think he's developed a system. I think he knows when to email GameScoop, and when it's more likely that I'm going to see his email.
Yeah, 5 minutes before the show.
Yeah, pretty much.
He's watching you at your desk. That's the part
I think so. Anyway, Randall says, there is a feature. He's talking about there's a major feature missing from video game consoles today. There's a feature I've wanted out of video game consoles ever since the iPhone 3G came out.
Wow.
And that is
A reset button on a controller.
a record of the game you have bought and the possibility of playing that game on future devices. I only bring up the iPhone 3G because that is when this concept became a reality. I still have Angry Birds from the year I bought that game and currently can play it on my iPhone 6. Nintendo has such a rich collection of games, I would never want to lose access to them. Sure, I could keep a CRT, composite cables, and a Nintendo NES with games. I could also download an emulator, but screw that. I want Nintendo to create this and make it work. I bought Kid Icarus on my Wii. It did not transfer to my Wii U unless I went into the old Wii mode and could play my old stuff. So, the world he wants is step 1, buy a game for a console. Step 2, you now have that game for every future console from that manufacturer.
Yeah, that's great. We're all behind that.
Thanks, Randall.
We've
Moving
improved
on.
it.
Seriously, like that would be the perfect thing.
It's like
I mean, I think like
There's a million reasons that'll never happen, but
there's a million
It's a great
things
thing.
that are bad about annualized, like a new phone every year. But one of the good things is there's much more of an expectation that your software carries over with you. You know, when there's 7 years between the PS3 and PS4, I don't know there's as much expectation that your PS4 will play your old PS3 games. But when I get a new phone, people would lose their minds if their apps just stopped working. And if the apps don't work, it's not Apple's fault, it's the app manufacturer's fault for not, updating their app to the new OS. And I completely share, sorry, this is the last thing I'll share is, starting as the mobile games editor at IGN, there's actually not a way to see a total, so I counted by hand one time. I think I have over 2,000 games in my iTunes account.
Wow.
And that's a significant, I could never switch to Android even if iOS became crap because I would lose all that library. I'm locked into that ecosystem forever now. Same with Steam.
I like the fact that they do that. I do think that things do get left behind, and putting the onus on the game developer. I like
get left behind.
the idea. I like that we can have things like this. I like systems like this exist, but some games do end up getting left behind. I mean, you talk about games getting updated. I have games I can't play anymore on my mobile device, for example, because the manufacturer went out of business, or because they're simply not interested in supporting the game anymore. And so, even in a universe where this happens, if we're talking about things by anachronistic games by companies that are eventually going to be swallowed by other companies who aren't interested in updating the properties that previous company produced, things are still going to get left behind, even in that digital reality. There's a lot of problems with making that dream come true. Another one you raised in a great article you wrote last week, you were talking about Wii games and what's going to happen when motion controls just phase out. How are you going to play these games? Some of which are great games.
In 10 years or 20 years, on whatever platform Nintendo's making games, you'll be able to buy every single Zelda game except Skyward Sword. Will be probably left behind.
I'm sure someone will figure out how to preserve that game.
I'm not sure of that at all. The motion controls are so deeply baked into the combat. Even if that one is, what about a game like Boom Blocks or Wii Sports?
The problem is sometimes it's even harder doing it. Someone will figure it out, but doing it legally, I think, is the difficult part. Doing it in the place where you're not existing in some kind of gray space. Another roadblock I've heard about, I think it was Jeremy Parrish talked about this, some virtual console services, the ESRB charges you when you get a game
That's
rated.
what I was going to bring up.
Yeah, okay, why don't you talk about this?
Well, so there's a lot of costs that are involved in just making a game again for work on another system. So you can either offload those to people, eat them at your company, or have the console manufacturer take those on. So the console manufacturer taking those on means that they, in their console, in their software, build emulation software, or sometimes they put hardware in, which is really weird.
Yeah.
Like the PlayStation 3 that played PlayStation 2
that.
games.
Yep.
So they eat that cost in development, and then they have to update that and make sure it works with all the old games forever, right? So that's them eating that. If they don't want to eat that cost, which they don't, I mean, this is like anything. Like if you can remove, 1 ounce of plastic from your system that you really don't need there, you're going to save that over tens of thousands of production units. It really adds up. Everything adds up. Anyway, so they can either eat that cost, or you can have the developer of that game keep it playable, right? So you're basically making a remake or a port. When you do that, you have to relicense it for the ESRB. You have to port it. You have to actually make it playable, and you have to develop that cost. So that's even more money. So like, even though you own an old version of that code, it doesn't mean that the developer owes you a new version of that code to play on your new system necessarily. We just don't have that kind of a relationship. So there's cost in just bringing it from console to console, and there's no clear path for how it works. Now, that's the point you just made, where app makers, they eat that cost. IGN updates our app all the time. We do it almost monthly with huge updates, partially to keep up with OS.
Yeah.
Like, that's a cost. That's a tremendous cost for our company. And if you think about it, like, who's going to eat that cost for Kid Icarus?
Then you have things like licensing fees. That's another issue you run into, or licensing agreements. You have things getting delisted, like Ninja Turtles from the Xbox store eventually because the license ran out. Games that were
Simpsons arcade game.
Exactly. Now, if you bought it, you own it forever. You've got that, or at least you own it as long as the service exists.
On the thing you can play it on.
But you can't buy it anymore because that deal hasn't been renegotiated. And then you have things like, am I ever going to be able to play DuckTales 2 on any, because who's going to go back and negotiate that licensing deal? Who's going to make that happen?
The point is, if you go back to cartridge, everything will be okay.
I mean, Sam just made such a good point about, there's an expectation among people that I bought this game once, I should be able to continue play it now. Like, I'm owed that. But sort of the missing nuance there that people don't always understand is that it is different software. Like running on the new console, it's not the same software. Some code had to be rewritten and changed. It is new, it is different, and there's a cost associated with that. So
just think about TVs changing. I mean, your TV isn't the same TV you had back in the day. It's a different resolution. So you can't just make your old code work on it.
I definitely agree with the sentiment. It doesn't feel good when your stuff doesn't go with you. I absolutely think that developers can and should find a way to do that when they can, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that that's a right or something that people are owed.
I don't think they're owed it. I think it's good for console developers and software developers to celebrate their history. I think it's good for their relationship with their fans.
And I think backwards compatibility, that's the big argument for it. Exactly. Is this concern?
We also always talk about, I mean, we've danced around it all the time on GameScoop lately. It feels weird that it keeps coming up, but just the game preservation. You see services like Good Old Games where their whole pitch is preserving these old games, and they didn't run. Like, just PCs couldn't run old DOS games and stuff like that, and they fix them up and polish them up, and now they can run again. But the funny thing is, now that Windows, went from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, some games on Good Old Games are broken.
GOG's gonna have to rewrite the wrapper again.
So
it's a weird thing.
So Windows 10 broke a lot of GOG games.
I'm of the opinion that if you can buy it, you should buy it because somebody went to the trouble to make it for you. And if you can't buy it, just steal it. That's really what I think. And then when it's available, buy it. I think that's a good ethical solution.
Don't put it on YouTube. If you steal it, you get your videos taken down.
Yeah, it's a very different thing.